Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Dawn Samples. I am your host for today and moderator for the webinar. Our webinar today is called Remote Places, Engaged Spaces. This is a collaborative project between the Southern Conference on Language Teaching, SCOLT, and More Learning at Avant Assessment. So my name is Dawn Samples. I'm the director for the Professional Learning Division at More Learning. More Learning stands for More Learning Opportunities Reaching Everyone. Just a few things before we get started with our guest. I know a lot of you have had questions about these, so I want to make sure we put your mind at ease right from the get-go. Those of you who are attending today, you will get a certificate of attendance. You'll also have a link to the recorded webinar sent to you, as well as a PDF of the slide deck and a PDF of the chat discussion. So I know a lot of people share a lot of great resources and ideas in the chat, and I want to make sure everyone has access to that. So you will have access to that. At the end of the webinar today, you'll get the survey. And tomorrow you'll have an email that will come to you that will have all of these linked in it. Okay? All right. So just a few introductions today. I want to make sure everyone knows who all is on board. I'm so happy to have my dear friends, Dr. Leslie Baldwin and Carmen Scoggins join us today. They were going to be moderating our chat and Twitter feeds today. So welcome, Leslie and Carmen.
Hi, everyone. We're glad you're here with us, and SCOLT really appreciates this partnership with Avant for doing this webinar.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. We are psyched to talk about engaged spaces.
Great. We're so glad you guys are here. And our guest panelists today who are going to be sharing some really awesome information with us. It's just a panel of rock stars. You're going to see we have Dr. Bobby Hobgood, who is the 2020 SCOLT president. He's also the director at the Language Resource Center at the University of, sorry, Bobby, of North Carolina. So Bobby, you there?
Yes, thanks, Dawn. Hello, everyone, and greetings from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Awesome. And our second panelist today is Chrissy Roe. Chrissy is our new 2020 Alabama World Language Teacher of the Year. And Chrissy teaches Spanish at Spain Park High School. Chrissy, are you there? You might need to unmute.
Hey, I'm here. Can you tell this is my first one? I apologize. Hello from Alabama. I'm glad to be joining y'all today.
Awesome. Thank you, Chrissy. And our third panelist today is Elena Kamenetzky. She is our 2020 SCOLT Teacher of the Year. Elena is a Japanese teacher at Eastern High School in Louisville, Kentucky. Elena, welcome.
Hey everyone, hello from Louisville. I'm so glad that you could be here with us. I know we spend a lot of time in front of the screen every day, and I hope we will make this time worth your while.
Thank you, Elena. I do want to just say thank you so much. I'm so excited. You know, this spring we have had so many unforeseen things happen. And I'm glad that we get to celebrate our toys from this year. And this is one way that everyone will get to participate and enjoy meeting them and hearing from them. We do have a poll that I am going to push out to you now. If you don't mind, if you would just take a moment to respond to our question, which is, have you ever taught in a remote learning environment of any kind before the COVID-19? I just realized I left one off of that. The COVID-19. We'd like to just get a minute to hear from you what your experience has been. And our second question is going to be for you to respond either through the chat or through the Twitter feed, and make sure you hashtag engaged spaces. The second question is, what is your teaching scenario? And what we mean by that is, are you teaching live synchronous classes? Are you teaching asynchronous? Are you delivering paper packets and just having office hours or check-ins with your students? Or are you not doing anything at all? What is your scenario right now for how you are able to continue to engage your learners in today's situation. So as you are responding, it looks like our poll has sort of slowed down a little bit, and it would appear that 72% of our participants today who are on the webinar right now did not teach in a remote learning environment prior to COVID-19. So that's really good for us to know as we engage into this section today and this webinar to have an idea of where you're coming from. And I know Carmen and Leslie will be monitoring the chat and the Twitter so we can get some feedback from you regarding our second question about what your teaching scenario is. All right, so we are now going to get right to our questions. Our first question is going to be, how do we sustain engagement in a remote learning environment? How do we keep that going? And the man with all the answers today is Dr. Bobby Hobgood. So Bobby, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Dawn. And well, I hope I have all of the answers. I have some answers, and I hope that they're the answers that everyone finds very useful this afternoon. You know, this is a very timely webinar for me as well, because as we are finishing up the last little more than a week of the semester at my university, I'm now already starting to plan for summer. And I've been asked by my department chair to teach an online course and to actually create a model for our department of how we're going to teach online courses that have either all asynchronous components or blended, both synchronous and asynchronous. And so I began thinking about the concept of engaging students, and in particular, it reminded me of the notion of a learning pathway. And the idea being that, you know, if we are asking students to engage in a variety of ways, in a variety of spaces, it is very likely that some of those students are going to get lost. And maybe you've heard the term lost in cyberspace. Those of you who have taught online before, whether you're blended, completely asynchronous, or a combination, can understand and empathize with me when I say that there's always that percentage that are lost every now and then in cyberspace. So how do we prevent students from getting lost in cyberspace, and how do we engage them in a learning pathway? And so I want to explain to you and illustrate to you what I see to be kind of a holistic view of engaging students, whether it is face-to-face, blended, or online. And I want to talk to you about this in 4 stages or 4 phases. The first is planning a pathway. And then once we plan the pathway, establishing the pathway. From there, monitoring this pathway. And then the final stage or phase, maintaining the pathway. So let's take a look first at planning a pathway. And so what is involved when we plan this learning pathway? And I'm going to ask my gorgeous assistant, if she would, to advance to the next slide. Yes, Dawn, hey, you know I was talking about you, didn't I? So nothing surprising to you here in terms of planning a learner pathway. So before the course begins, beginning with student-friendly learning objectives. In other words, the objectives aren't for us. We know what's going to happen. We don't need to use educationese, but rather write it in a way that students can readily understand what they're supposed to do, and then go back to those objectives throughout the course. So maybe midway through a module or at the end of the module, but at least once in a module, we should refer back to those so students have a sense of where they are on their trajectory. The second suggestion I would offer to you in planning that pathway is to develop learning experiences that cover the gamut of the gradual release of responsibility model, i.e., experiences where you first as the teacher are going to model something, or a knowledgeable other is going to model. Maybe that's a tutorial or video. And then moving from that to collaborative activities where you and the students do something together, going on to perhaps group activities where students are interacting with one another, and then finally independent work. And as you do that, think about the ways in which you can integrate and offer choice. In other words, how do you differentiate students' opportunities and options for engaging in that content? For example, one of the things I like to do with assessments or capstone sorts of projects is to use a raft strategy, where you provide a number of choices of student role and the audience that they're addressing and the format that they're going to demonstrate their learning in. Maybe the format is a multimedia slide presentation, or it's a recording, or an article that they write. And then finally, the role, audience, format, topic, and then the topic, what's the topic they're addressing. The last thing I would encourage you to think about in planning that pathway is creating assessments both for learning and of learning. So those of you who are curriculum geeks like me, you'll readily recognize that we're talking about formative assessment and summative assessment. So assessments for learning, many opportunities where students can, along the way, check their progress and know where they are without you giving them a grade. So a common example would be in your learning management system or in some third-party tool, creating a quiz that students can take and get immediate feedback, but not just feedback as to whether the answer was right or wrong, but why their chosen answer was right or why the answer was incorrect. And then finally, assessments of learning. Those are those summative assessments where we say, okay, at this point in the semester, if you can't appropriately greet someone in the target language, then that's not boding very well for you. And this is an area where you really need to work. So I can't give you the A here. So the first stage, planning a pathway, thinking about from the get-go how students will engage and how you will engage students. From there, we move on to establishing that pathway. And this involves the 3 steps that I want to share with you here. First and foremost, clarifying the relationship between the different learning spaces, for lack of a better term. And by that, I mean students are working independently in class, they're working in groups, they're doing whole class work in the classroom with you, either face-to-face or the online classroom, if you're having a synchronous meeting like we are today. And then what they do outside of any sort of group meeting, i.e. the homework or independent learning. So making sure that you reference, for example, during class, what they're going to do when they leave that experience with you and they are then working independently. Or as I'm planning to do this summer, they're working with a partner in some partner chats. So making sure it's clear to them how all of the activities across those spaces relate to one another. Next, making sure that you create and ensure transitions between learning experiences and learning spaces. It's often the case that I get to ask students, so tell me what happened in this class or what happened in so-and-so's class. And their response is, well, we did this, we did this, we did this, and we did this. And they speak of it in a way that is simply a listing or a retelling of the activities with no real semblance of connection or understanding of what was the connection between activity 1 and activity 2 and activity 3. So as educators, to establish that pathway, make sure that we give explicit direction and information to students about, here's what we're doing now. And then at the end, okay, here's what we just did. And now that we've done this, we're going to move on to this activity, and here's why. Okay. Finally, fostering, can we go back? No, that's okay. Finally, in establishing this pathway, fostering some interaction in 3 ways. Interaction that occurs student to student, student to content, and student to instructor. Now, I'll tell you, if you will pay attention to that and you'll ask yourself the question, whether this is a face-to-face course, blended or completely online, what are the student-to-student interactions? What are the student-to-content interactions? And what are the student-instructor interactions? If you'll ask yourself that question and you can answer those things, that will be a great strategy for you to ensure that you're creating a learning community. you're creating an opportunity for students to engage in a variety of ways. So we have planned a pathway, we've established a pathway. Now that we're underway, how do we monitor what's going on? So 3 suggestions here for you. First of all, a technique that I love to use both in online courses and face-to-face courses, and that is micro feedback, soliciting little bits of feedback from students about their experience. A very common example of this in a face-to-face class or an online class is the exit ticket strategy, where you might ask students at the end, tell me about one thing that went really well for you today, or something that really motivated you. And then the converse of that would be, tell me about something that was unclear for you today, or something that you're still struggling with. So those little bits of micro feedback, whether you have the student's name attached to it or get that feedback anonymously, is a really good way for you to monitor what's going on. So in an online course, I do this every single module. In a face-to-face class, I try to do it at least once every couple of weeks or so. Secondly, once you've got some of that information, now to couple that information with what you observe about student movement during your course. So as we're teaching remotely right now, if you're looking at a learning management system and you're using the discussion tool, or you're using a quiz tool, or you're using third-party tools, what do you notice about students' use of those tools, their success, and their abilities to complete the task within the allotted amount of time, and the degree to which they are successful with those tasks? And so based on that information, you might want to make some changes to upcoming activities that use some of those same, what I call activity structures or tools. And then finally, holding students accountable to established procedures. So if you insisted that they come early to a synchronous session like this, that they cleared all distractions from the room, that the dog is outside, brother and sister are in another room, they know that during the next hour you can't be disturbed, making sure that they continue to maintain those established procedures. And then finally, maintaining this pathway. And so 3 suggestions I'll leave you with here on this next slide. First, making sure that you humanize your course by inserting yourself throughout the process. One of the ways that I do that in a completely asynchronous course is, in addition to introductory videos that might be more formal, I also will conclude every module with kind of an ad hoc video where I'll do a summary of what happened during that module. I reference things that students said, I reference what happened. I might even introduce a little bit of content to ask students to extend their learning from the module. That's a personal reflection you see here in the second suggestion. And finally, strategically prompting students to maintain integration across learning spaces. In other words, reminding them that, okay, your homework assignment is going to take place here, or tomorrow we're going to be in that space. Okay, so making sure that you direct traffic so that nobody gets lost in cyberspace. So planning, establishing, monitoring, and maintaining a learning pathway. Some suggestions I offer to you, friends, for how we engage our students. Okay, Dawn?
Thank you so much, Bobby. It occurs to me that so much of what you presented will sound so familiar to most of our teachers out there, because a lot of those things are practices they're already doing with their students in their more traditional setting.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it sounds cliche to say, I'm not going to tell you anything new today, but perhaps what I've done today is brought together things that you know in perhaps a different framework, through a different lens, so you can see things a little differently.
Thank you so much, Bobby. We are going to check in now with Leslie and Carmen so they can kind of give us some idea of what's happening in the Twitter and chat world. What are you guys seeing out there?
Well, this is very exciting. Don't forget to use the hashtag engaged spaces for Twitter. First of all, just in answering like, what is your teaching scenario? We're kind of all over the place. We're running the gamut, so to speak. We've got everything from completely asynchronous classes to a blend of the two, synchronous, asynchronous. One person even mentioned still doing paper packets, but hope to move to online teaching next week. So there's just all kinds of scenarios going on, which again just speaks to what we as teachers are having to do right now and how you're so graciously living up to the task. So thank you so much for that. But the biggest, I think, takeaway so far from what Bobby said was the critical importance of offering that micro feedback that we don't necessarily do consciously in class when we're face to face with our students, because it just happens so naturally. But now I think with this remote learning scenario, being very specific about what kinds of feedback we're giving our students seems to be one of the most important things we can be doing right now.
That's great to hear. Leslie, do you have any information to share with us?
Well, it's just really interesting to see what everyone is putting in the chat box and on Twitter as far as their teaching situations, because as you might expect, it's a gigantic range. It's just a huge variety of what everyone is involved in. But I do think that that Bobby's comments and the others that we'll hear today are going to help people no matter what their situation is. And one person said, you know, this is really helpful, and she really wishes she had had this before getting thrown into this situation. And, you know, we really are all in something that's not exactly online learning and is more emergency at home learning, whatever that might mean. So I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that from the panel, but that's kind of the thread going on there.
Yeah, Leslie, I'm so glad that you brought that up because actually in a department meeting we had last week, we had a discussion about this, in fact, that, you know, there's a big difference in being asked with maybe not even a week's notice in our case, to rethink how we're going to interact with students for the rest of the semester versus what I'm in the process of doing right now in preparation for summer school that begins in about a month from today. And that is actually planning using a learner pathway that I suggested today. So there's a very big difference, and it's a little unfair. I think every time I hear someone on the news or read people talk about what we're doing right now as online learning, I guess I have to disagree a little bit and say this isn't online learning we're doing right now. This is remote emergency. Let's do the best we can learning.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone really foresaw being in this position even just a few weeks ago. So I, for one, am very humbled and just honored to have so many incredible hero colleagues who are in the trenches and who are just making amazing things happen, and kids are still learning. It's really exciting. So we are now going to move on to our next question. Our next question, come on computer, there we go. Question 2 is, how do we optimize learning for our population of learners? And to help us answer that question, Elena is going to share some information with us. So Elena, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thank you. So first, in order to answer this question, I think we need to back up and think about what is our population of learners right now? Because even if you know your students really, really well, you might not know their scenario right now that they're in, because everybody's life is kind of different right now. First, the issue of access. Lots and lots of students might not have home wireless, and that might not necessarily be related to issues of, like, you know, poverty or living in an area without access. So let me give you a total confession here. I am an adult, a working adult living in an urban area, and I did not have home wireless until a month ago because I was one of those filthy millennials who cut the cord. And I didn't have a TV, so I didn't want to pay for cable or internet. And if I needed to work at home, I would just hotspot my phone. So, but that doesn't work for this type of scenario, so I actually had to get cable internet. So a lot of our families might not have internet at home for that reason. Or if they have smartphones, their smartphone data may be extremely limited. So things like joining an online class or streaming a video might eat up their data. And a lot of them are siblings using shared devices. I and think all of you have probably heard this from your students, you know, many of them have to share one phone, one tablet, or one computer. And sometimes they might have to share with their parents too, if their parents are also working from home. So that's the situation they're then with in terms of access. In terms of time, if you teach older students, some of your older students might be essential workers. And I know some of my students, I teach high school, are essential workers. And they are working more now than they did before. Some of them are practically working full time. If you have live classes and your school or district has like simultaneous live classes, like at my school, it's like everybody's first period meets at the same time on Monday. What do you do if you have like 3 siblings who have one device and all of them are supposed to be in class at the same time? So that's also an issue. And also for a lot of our students who again are in this sort of emergency learning situation, they might be being responsible and making, you know, prioritizing their decisions and their time. And if they have to do that, they might choose like their graduation requirements over their elective classes. So that's happening too. In terms of students' mental health, this is something I think about and worry about a lot. I do know students who have lost loved ones. I know that they're grieving. I know students who are anxious about their loved ones and anxious about their parents losing jobs, or anxious about the fact that parents have already lost jobs. And some of them are in not great home environments. So we have to sort of consider the headspace they might be in. And we have to adjust our learning so that we can give them sort of options, I guess, for a low level of engagement and a high level of engagement if they're up to it. All right, so when we talk about asynchronous learning, this is something that for me was very hard to adjust to because I'm extremely new to this. We have to think about what's happening with our students when we're not with them in the classroom. And I think for most of us, we're using some sort of platform where there's, at a minimum, there's a static content. Like you have somewhere where you upload a lesson and a task. And I saw in the chat, many people are using Google Classroom. My district is also using Google Classroom. If you're doing paper packets, this is the same thing. You have content that you're teaching them and a task. If you are able to use online, you have to present sort of multiple modalities. Like when I upload a lesson now, I have a written explanation and I have a video lesson or lecture because some students just need to hear your voice and see your face before they can learn it. You need to be thinking about bandwidth. So something I've had to learn how to do is I've had to learn how to compress my videos to make them smaller. I'm a big fan of PDFs and I have to turn everything into PDFs now because PDFs are lower bandwidth format than like a PowerPoint. And you have to give students options for turning in their work. So even if you have one task that every student is going to do, you should list out explicitly options like you can make a Google Doc or write it on your own paper and take a picture or leave a comment to this post or send me a link. So make sure that whatever task you give them, they have more than one option for however they're going to turn it in to you. And a good rule of thumb, this is something that my principal told us at a faculty meeting, and I found it's kind of true. Something that takes 20 minutes to do in a classroom might take a student an hour to do at home. So that's something you have to keep in mind. When you have live classes, my district is real strict on the live class has to be optional. So you can't necessarily, like, again, your districts might be different, your situations might be different, but we have to think about like the minimum should be the static content and the live class is amazing, awesome if the students can connect, but we have to plan around them maybe not being able to connect to them. I found in my live classes, I have to go over the lesson, even the lesson I've already presented in my static content, and that's okay. Like that redundancy is okay because sometimes the students just need it and they need to hear it. And you need to plan things, the flow of things, so that you're flexible with students leaving or joining late. So it doesn't like completely mess up your flow if somebody drops in halfway through. And if you're planning activities, you have to plan around potential technical difficulties, like especially with language, if you're gonna do any sort of activity where the students have to interact, you've gotta give them the option of microphone or text. Because you never know when all of a sudden the mic stops working or Like in my case, oh no, I can't convert to Japanese keyboard on my dad's computer. That happens too. Okay, so something that might be the, oh no, with asynchronous learning, when we think about asynchronous learning is, how am I gonna scaffold now if students might not be there for step 1? Like, how do I get them on board for step 2 if they've missed some of that essential knowledge and prep work and they never did the formative assessment? Or first thing, the mantra that I've been telling myself over and over again is, this is not a new problem. Because even when we had our students in the classroom every single day with us, we still had that situation where students would not learn the content they were supposed to learn. And then when the class is moving on, you have a couple of them who are like, whoa, 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 whoa. All right. And we also have to think about reprioritizing our standards. If we're stuck in, I don't want to say stuck in, we are rising to meet the challenge of this scenario. We have to limit some of the content. We have to limit some of our coverage. We have to maybe give up some of our favorite activities. I am mourning some of my favorite activities that I have not been able to successfully convert to this online format. And we have to reprioritize what the standards have to be for this year. What has to be taught. Like at the end of, for me, it would be Japanese 1, at the end of Japanese 2, at the end of Japanese 3, what do they absolutely have to learn before moving on to the next level? Related to that, what can be taught remotely? And what might be taught and assessed in one neatly chunked lesson? You have to think about one step at a time because feedback takes longer now. Something that I realized about myself is I give so much simultaneous feedback in the classroom. Like if the student is saying something, I'll interrupt them and correct them or give them comments immediately after. If they're typing something, I'm always like, misete, they will give me their tablet and I will like correct it right there. That takes longer in this online format where they have to do something, turn it in, you look at it, you give them feedback, might return it to them. So that process has slowed down. So if you're in a district that's sort of doing like weekly lessons, you might want to think, if I'm doing like a 2-step process, maybe I have to do only 1 step at a time. The first week of NTI, I posted an activity that I thought was really cool and I was really proud of it. And it was like step 1, step 2. And we were supposed to do that in 1 week. All the students rushed to do step 2 without doing step 1. And I was like, well, maybe not next time. So, and again, the problem of students dropping in and out of learning is not new. If a student is off the radar for 3 weeks and then they come back and they're like, I don't understand what we're doing, you might just say, hey, on our Google Classroom, go back to week 1 and, you know, do that assignment, turn it in, I'll give you feedback, and we might have to do that. Meanwhile, you have some students who are going to be super, super, super gung-ho while you're slowing down the content and the coverage. And that's where you give them the optional, like the challenges, the extra credit, the extra ways to keep them engaged. And this might be where you can do things that take advantage of the new normal, make them do like a TikTok, make them do something they wouldn't be able to do in the classroom. And I don't say make, I say let, because that should be an optional, like an extra type of thing. All right, how do I support learners who are learning asynchronously? I want to go to the bottom of my slide first. Something I had to learn, it's okay for you to be asynchronous. I have so much respect now for people who have done this before and for people in, I guess, any career that work at home, because I've never had this experience where I was sitting at a desk with my Outlook tab open all day and people like vying for my attention all day long. I'm like, how do you do that? It's okay for you to set aside, like, I'm only going to look at student work once per day. So like for me, at the end of the day, I go through and I check and see if there's anybody who needs feedback. And if they turn in something an hour later, I won't get to it till tomorrow. That's okay. Check-in forms, something that our district is encouraging us to do and that I think is a good idea, is have a little like check-in form on your classes, and they only have to respond once a week. Something like a Google form that can easily collect responses for you and easily display them. And you should always ask questions that establish sort of a human connection, like, how are you? You know, what's going on? Is there anything you need to tell me? And also you can solicit feedback about the online format, your assignments, if they're having technical difficulties, if they didn't understand something. And something I found, if I don't make the responses required, I get more responses. So, and then when students point out that there are problems, you should listen to them. I learned this week that when I leave comments on a student's Google document, like leave comments on the document, they can't see that on mobile. So that's something that I learned, and when students point that out, you got to listen to them.
That's great. Elena, so many good ideas. And I know I've been kind of monitoring a little bit, looking at what's happening in our chat and on Twitter, and so many teachers that are so appreciative of these ideas. And I think just you're being vulnerable and honest about your own experience is very poignant and is also, I think, very encouraging for a lot of teachers. Thank you so much for sharing and for just putting yourself out there. It means a lot to me too, to hear what you've had to share. Leslie and Carmen, would you like to maybe share with us a little bit what you're hearing and seeing in our feeds?
Sure. Well, in the Twitter world, first of all, I think, Elena, that was spectacular. And like, I've looked at your slides before, but just hearing you say it out loud is so meaningful. So thank you. Lots of things coming out. Remembering to take things one step at a time, be kind to ourselves, be kind to our students, show that grace. And so many people said that, Elena, quote, you described so many of our students, our current situation, because we know that not every student has access or equal access. So you hit the nail on the head there. And I personally would like to say, you mentioned bandwidth, thinking in terms of like technology, but also just our own emotional bandwidth. When does that bandwidth run out? And when do we say, okay, enough is enough for today? Because there's always tomorrow to get back to things. So I appreciate, again, everything that you said. Thank you.
Leslie, do you have anything to add? Have you, I know you've been monitoring too. What are some things you've noticed in the chat?
Just so many things, so many comments on how helpful this piece is, and the idea of continuing to connect with students, really humanize the whole situation, even if you are in an asynchronous or kind of paper packet situation. Lots of comments on doing things like choice boards, really being flexible with timelines and due dates and those pieces to make it manageable for students. And a few people talking about that idea of the student survey and checking in with students and hearing from them how it's going, what's it like for them, what's helpful, what's not helpful. And that goes back to what Bobby was saying about getting that micro feedback from students for you as the teacher on what's working and what's not working and how can you help with that. And there was one comment that I really liked about doing those check-ins with students in lessons that aren't bell ringers. They aren't the beginning of the class, but are the way the teacher is saying, I care, I want to know what's going on with you.
Mm-hmm.
Such good points. And so we're going to move on to our next question. And I think that our next question is especially relevant to our audience today because it's taking into account the fact that we are working so hard to engage our learners. But sometimes in this new reality, how do we keep ourselves engaged? And Chrissy is going to address this question with you. So Chrissy, how do we as teachers stay engaged in this new, novel for us learning environment?
Well, hello everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you guys today. We're talking about keeping teachers engaged right now. And we've talked a lot about engaging our students, but we do have to stop and think about how all of this is affecting us. At the very beginning, we did a poll, and based on the poll that we saw, 70% of our attendees today have never done any remote teaching online. That means 70% of us are probably still sitting in shock, trying to get over what has happened over the last few weeks. And those 70% may even be thinking that the other 30% know exactly what's going on, which is not the case either. I have taught, and I'm currently teaching both in face-to-face classrooms and in the virtual environment. And my first thought was, okay, my virtual kids will be fine. I can just take what I've been doing, we'll transition over. And that's not working. These kids that are coming from a face-to-face environment, we're having to adjust that virtual world to them, to their environment. So we're all in the same storm. We're just in different boats. And it is important that we stop and we take care of ourselves a little bit. And we're so accustomed to engaging with our students in face-to-face that we love to interact with them. We're their cheerleaders, we're their confidants, we're their mentors. But the question is, how do we stay engaged with these folks when the students are nowhere in sight? And the first thing I want to look at is find your routine. Bobby talked a lot about routines for the students. So it's important, though, to take that same concept and look at it yourself. I like the idea of emotional bandwidth, the words that Carmen used just a little while ago, because we are having to figure out what our bandwidth is emotionally. If you remember the first few weeks of school in your face-to-face environment, it takes a couple weeks to find that routine, to find out what works to help you connect to your students. A lot of us are still in that 3-week window of adjusting to our new normal. And so it's going to take a little bit of time. Don't worry about it. Find your norm. And as you do, remember that it is okay to set boundaries. One of the things that has been mentioned a lot is being flexible with due dates, which is great. We have to be, but that means assignments are coming in late. They're coming in 24/7. We're getting emails 24/7. And this at-home job for us is 24/7 on top of all the other jobs we have. We're moms, we're dads, we're husbands, we're wives. We have so many different responsibilities that we have that we've got to set those boundaries. So it's okay. For example, what I do with late work is I grade late work 1 day a week. I acknowledge that it's been received and remind the students, you will see your grades on Friday. That's when I'll sit down and go back and pull all the late work and spend time on it. That way I'm not digging through every single day. It's okay to dedicate specific hours in which to respond to your student emails. Elena mentioned that a little while ago. Let your students know, I will respond. But if they email you at 2 in the morning, they need to know it's going to be a little while before you get to that. And that's perfectly okay. It's okay also to take care of your family first. A lot of us are parents and we have to teach our own children. I've got to sit my kids down at the table and get them started with their classes. I have an elementary and a middle schooler. I get them started every morning, take care of them, and then once they're ready to work, I can shift over to my classroom focus. So it is important to set those routines for yourself. Just remember, it's okay. You can't be on the clock 24/7. And as we do, we want to stick to the basics. We are being bombarded with free tech tools, with tons of free virtual lessons, all these different best practices, and we're drowning in the sea of emails and resources. And all of that kind of leads us to self-doubt. Well, if everybody's doing this and I'm not, then I'm doing something wrong. And that is so not the case. Realize that it is okay to stick to what you know and what your students know. They want to hear from you. They want to see their regular textbook. They want to see those regular websites. And they want to hear your regular feedback. So don't feel like you have to step out and try a bunch of new things right now as we're in these uncharted waters. Just avoid the bells and whistles, which kind of leads us to the next slide. And that is, as we keep it basic, we want to make sure, most importantly, above all else, that we humanize our interactions. I mentioned earlier that I teach face-to-face and I teach virtual students. I've been teaching my virtual classes for about 10 years now, and I still have to remind myself that on the other side of that computer screen is a human being. My kids have profile pictures. I have so many big owls and obbies, every SEC image you can imagine. We're from Alabama. But I have to remind myself that that big owl is a student named John. He's taking 8 classes. He loves band. He loves math. He hates reading. And he needs extra help with the preterite versus the imperfect. And so it's extremely important that we remember that they are people. One thing that I have found that is a very simple fix that has helped me in the virtual world, and I'm using it right now with my remote emergency learning, is instead of asking for audio recordings, we do a lot of speaking assignments in all of our language classes. I ask them to simply use a video camera if they have access to one. The same assignment, nothing's changed. but I get to see their faces. And in doing so, I see their expressions. I see their backgrounds. I see they tell you all kinds of stuff based just on the clothes that they're wearing, their mannerisms. And so it helps remind me that, hey, these are those individual students that I have poured my life into for the rest of this year. And just as important as it is to see their faces, they need to see yours. And that's been mentioned. Bobby mentioned earlier, I think, making a concluding video at the end, or you can do one at the beginning, as I think Elena mentioned. But let them see your face and keep it candid. It doesn't have to be perfect. I've seen tons of bloopers online, and the kids love those when they see that the teachers are making these videos and they're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just said that. Or you get interrupted because your daughter walks into the room, or a dog or a pet or something barks in the background. The kids want to see that. They want it to be personal. And one of the big things, as you see their faces, you're able to sympathize more with your students. If you let them become a screen name, then they are no longer people. And we don't want that to happen. We want to keep that sympathy that we have for them and their scenario and the things that they're going through. One of the traps that we can fall into in the virtual world and the remote learning world that we're mentioning is losing faith in our students. It is so easy for kids online to resort to Google Translate, to unethical means of turning in work. And so don't accuse your students. Keep faith in them. That is a huge step right now. You want them to know that you're watching and that you do know kind of what's going on, but we don't want to lose faith in those students. I changed my wording several years ago, and it was huge in changing basically the whole characteristic of my online classes. And basically, I wrote it here for you on the slide. I said, all work must exhibit mastery of the current topic or topics covered. Which means if I get an assignment, we're working in preterite tense, but in the assignment, I'm getting all present perfect, my students don't know. Instead of saying, you translated this, I reply back and say, unfortunately, I can't grade this assignment. You're not showing off what we just learned. And so the students were reminded, hey, she knows what I did. Maybe I need to go back and figure out what is the preterite, and go back and look at what they turned in and compare the two. So definitely something we want to be really careful with right now. We want to see their faces so that we keep this human, and also so we don't lose faith in our students. And then the next slide, we're moving on to quality versus quantity. There's been a lot of talk here about different assignments. Keep in mind, your time is valuable just as theirs is. It's been mentioned that it takes twice as long to work with a student online as it does to work with them in the classroom, which means we do have to cut back. We've got to be careful with what we assign. At the start of this, I had friends that were going to make an assignment every single day. As a high school student, as a high school teacher, if you have 150 students and you assign one assignment a day, we're at over 700 assignments coming in. We can't do that right now. So focus on one key production assignment each week. Throughout the week, use those micro feedback activities that were mentioned earlier by Bobby, exit slips, things that can be collected on one form. I saw somebody posted in the chat, how do you do micro feedback? A good suggestion would be to create a Google form or a post in the Google Classroom, a question survey post in the Google Classroom, so that all the responses are put into one place. That way you can see all the responses quickly and just kind of look through them. It takes the students just a couple of minutes to do it. Takes you a few seconds to kind of scan through, just check off whether they did it or not, but you don't have to reply to every one of those. You can just give general feedback throughout the week. Hey, I've seen some comments on this, or I've seen comments on that. Mention that in your video clips, but keep most of your assignments to things that can be auto-graded, collected quickly on one form, but then one assignment a week. Give them that feedback that they want. That's where your teaching takes place in this remote environment. I had a student today who emailed me. We've had a great conversation throughout the day about the one assignment she was working on last week, and it encompassed everything that we had been doing all week long. She never would have gotten that if I had had to respond 5 different times throughout the week. So try to think, how can I pull all this together and focus on one key assignment that's going to generate some great feedback and communication between yourself and the student. Ultimately, they want to hear from you. And then finally, if you'll flip over to the last slide for me, As we wrap up, let's think for just a moment about the question that you guys answered at the start of the program. Everybody shared what their remote places look like, and there are hundreds of different scenarios that have been mentioned. But all of them have one common denominator, and that is that they involve a teacher and they involve students. And if we can remember that behind the screen, or in the case of some of you, behind the paper packets, there's an individual learner, and these are individual learners that we have come to love and respect throughout the year. If you can recognize that, they're going to recognize the same in you. That's going to be the key to making all of our remote spaces, no matter what they are. That's what's going to make those remote spaces engaging places. And with that, Carmen and Leslie, we'll hand it back to you guys and see if you have any other questions or comments that have come up.
All right, Chrissy, are you trying to make me cry this afternoon? Because I'm over here wiping my eyes. Wait, check it out. Now, I even went and got some of my toilet paper for it. So, you know, and this is just the scarce thing right here. So this is valuable right here. Wow. Again, just remembering that what's coming in on Twitter is just the humanizing that piece. Remembering that you're a person too, that students are people, and just exactly what you said at the end, just that last point, everyone's commenting on, remember who's behind the screen, because I think that's where we spend so much time in the classroom building relationships with our students, and all of a sudden we don't see them anymore. But it's not like those relationships have gone anywhere. So thank you so much for that beautiful reminder. And that seems to be what's trending on Twitter right now. So thank you.
Wow, Carmen, I was not as insightful as you. I didn't bring any toilet tissue along with me. I'm over here like trying not to cry too. Such passion and so many great ideas. Leslie, I know you've seen some wonderful things happening in the chat room too. Do you have anything you want to comment on?
Yes, a lot of the same kind of thing, like Carmen said, and a lot of appreciation for the pragmatism and the practicality of the suggestions from all the panelists today. But a couple of questions, and I don't know if we'll have a chance to really address both, but I'll throw them out there, and Dawn, you can kind of help maybe direct. One that came up in a few places is about giving that feedback and maintaining that life balance. So how do you, in this environment, give feedback in a timely manner, especially on late work when they need that feedback before they're moving forward with everyone else, and still have the balance that we're talking about. So that was one question that kind of came up. And then also a lot of people along the way have been asking for more ideas on providing that microfeedback to students. So Bobby was talking about getting the feedback from students about how things are going and what they need. But there's been several questions about providing feedback to students. So maybe those questions kind of go together about how to make it timely, how to do it, and still keep that balance and not be working just all the time.
Can I?
Yes, Chrissy.
Can I throw something in really quick? Just some little tips and tricks that I picked up from the virtual world. As students are working through the week, like I said, I like to focus on the one big assignment at the end. You get your individual feedback. But if you're seeing common problems, keep a running document of responses so that when kids ask the same questions over and over, you can go to that document and copy and paste. I have 3 pages of linked notes to every grammar topic I've ever covered in my virtual classes. And so I'll just go, if they're having trouble with the predicate versus imperfect, I'll go copy my links, paste it in really quick, and just say, looks like you're having trouble with this. Check out these notes for extra help. And it looks like I spent hours preparing all this stuff for one student, when in reality, it's just sitting over here and I just copied and pasted something in. So make yourself a cheat sheet. As students are asking or having problems, make a cheat sheet, save your responses, and copy and paste. It works.
Such a great idea. Oh, I love it, Chrissy. That's a really very pragmatic and practical idea. Bobby and Elena, do you guys have any other ideas you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of thoughts there. One, giving feedback to every single student for every single activity is suicide. I mean, don't do it. You can't do it. So instead, consider the opportunities to give what I call global feedback. So for instance, in the French 2 class that I'm teaching right now remotely, rather than giving students individual feedback on an assignment that they're working on, I've told them, complete this assignment, and by tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to post the answers to that assignment so you can check yourself. So rather than me giving them feedback on, 19 separate homework assignments, they can check themselves, which has the added benefit of really motivating and engaging students to be more responsible for their own learning. And then similar to what Chrissy said before, throughout the week, I will collect as well ideas and problem areas that I'm seeing. And that summary video that I mentioned to you before, that's an opportunity for me to recognize and acknowledge those challenges so that I'm not doing it on a case-by-case basis, because often what happens, and you know this to be true, when you put that out there, other students will say, I had that same question, or I was struggling with that as well. And it can have the benefit of validation for the student.
Those are great ideas, Bobby. I do want to make sure that this conversation continues. So many of you are sharing so many great ideas. And once the webinar is over and our chat room is closed, you guys can still share. You can just hashtag engage spaces and continue to have this conversation and share ideas and resources. And we also really want to hear from you. What your takeaways were. So please share those with us. It helps us know what was valuable to you and what was helpful, and also to be able to plan for future webinars. We do have a quote that we wanted to share with you. This quote is, "Love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy effort, and keep on learning," by Carol Dweck. Carmen shared this quote with us for today, and I think it's a perfect quote for the situation we find ourselves in right now. Just a few things that I want to wrap up before we move on and get back to our engaged spaces. Bobby, did you want to talk about what's coming up?
Absolutely, Dawn. Opportunities like this don't happen all the time. So we want to, first of all, thank you, Dawn, and in addition to my esteemed colleagues, Elena and Chrissy, and to Avant for hosting this event today. And we're going to remind you of an annual opportunity for you to engage in similar sorts of engaging, timely conversations by folks who are just like you, working really hard to address the current needs of students and the current needs of our world. And so the Southern Conference on Language Teaching hosts our annual conference somewhere in the 13-state region in the southeastern part of the United States. Our next conference will be held on March the 18th through the 20th in 2021 in Atlanta, Georgia. And we invite you to attend the conference. We also invite you to submit a proposal to present at this conference. The deadline for that is September the 1st, 2020. Our focus for this conference is language through an unfiltered lens. So we want to take an unfiltered, clear, head-on look at what does it mean to teach and learn languages in 2021. We hope to see you in Atlanta. Thanks, Dawn.
Oh, thank you. I know everyone's looking forward to it, and everyone missed so much not getting to have our face-to-face SCOLT this year, but we certainly are so thankful to you, Bobby and Elena and Chrissy and Carmen and Leslie for sharing with us today and bringing a little bit of SCOLT to life with all of our colleagues and friends across the country. So make sure that you get that proposal in and make plans for next year. Just a few little do not forgets for you guys. When you log out of the webinar today, you will be presented with a link. If you complete that brief survey, it's just to give us a little bit of feedback about your experience today. When you click submit, don't forget to click submit. It will take you to a window, and from that window, there'll be a link there where you can click on it and download your certificate of attendance. So make sure that you do that if you need that hour. Also, continue to have these discussions. Please continue to share. Just the Twitter world has been such a great resource for teachers. And you make sure to use the hashtag #EngageSpaces. And tomorrow you will receive an email that will have links to the certificate, again, if you don't have time to do it today, as well as a PDF of the chat discussion so that you don't lose anything from that you might have seen today and don't want to make sure that you have in your possession. And you'll also get a copy of the slide deck with some information there in more detail as well. So the recording of this will be on our morelearning.avantassessment.com website. So you can go there. There's a page off of that website for our YouTube webinars and things that we're uploading to YouTube there. So please make sure and check that out if you want to share this recording with someone else. We would absolutely love for you to do that. I just want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for all the great contributions. Thank you to our panelists and presenters, and for all of you teachers out there for what you're doing every day. I, as a parent and as a colleague, just appreciate you so much. And I thank you so much for participating in this and just helping us all to be more together. So thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we will see you online.